The silver dollars hit the rough-hewn table with the finality of a judge's gavel, each coin ringing against the wood like a death knell. Nerita Fairweather's breath caught in her throat as she stared at the small fortune scattered before her more money than her family had seen in 3 desperate years. "That's your bride price, girl." The giant Hoodspoken stood nearly 7 feet tall, his broad shoulders blocking out the lamplight from the saloon behind him. Caspian Ironwood's voice rumbled like distant thunder, and his steel-gray eyes held the same cold determination that had made him the most feared ranch owner in all of Copper Ridge territory. "You'll give me 3 strong boys, starting tonight." Nerita's father cowered in the corner of their ramshackle cabin, his gambling debts finally catching up to him in the form of this mountain of a man. Her mother wept silently by the cold fireplace, clutching baby Ophelia to her chest. The twins, barely 10 years old, huddled together on their straw mattresses, wide eyes reflecting the terror that permeated the room. "I won't," Nerita whispered, though her voice shook like autumn leaves. At 19, she'd seen enough of the world to know what men like Ironwood wanted from women like her. "I won't be bought like cattle." Ironwood's laugh was as harsh as a winter storm. "Look around you, little sparrow. This hovel you call home is falling down around your ears. Your PA owes me $800 in gambling debts. And unless you've got that sum hidden somewhere, you don't have a choice." He stepped closer, and Nerita could smell leather and tobacco and something wilder the scent of a man who'd tamed the wilderness with his bare hands. His dark hair was streaked with premature silver at the temples, and scars crisscrossed his knuckles like a map of violence. Everything about him screamed danger. "My ranch needs heirs," he continued, his voice dropping to a growl that seemed to vibrate through her bones. "I'm 35 years old, and I'll not die without sons to carry on the Ironwood name. You're young, healthy, and pretty enough. You'll do." "Please," Nerita's father whimpered from his corner. "She's a good girl, sir, pure as snow." "You find sons?" Rage flashed through Nerita like lightning. Her own father, selling her virtue to pay his debts. She'd worked her fingers raw, taking in sewing and washing just to keep food on their table. And this was how he repaid her sacrifice. "What guarantee do I have?" she asked suddenly, surprising herself with the steadiness in her voice. "What's to stop you from using me and then casting me aside when you're done?" Ironwood's eyebrows rose slightly, as if he hadn't expected defiance from such a small package. "You'll be my legal wife, full protection under the law, your name on the deed to half my property, your family's debt forgiven, and enough money to buy them a proper house in town." The offer hung in the air like smoke. Nerita looked at her baby sister's pale, hollow cheeks, at her mother's worn hands, at the twins, who hadn't had a decent meal in weeks. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. "And if I refuse, then I'll have your father arrested for theft and fraud. He'll hang, and your family will starve in the streets." Ironwood's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, not quite regret, but perhaps a recognition of the cruelty he was offering. "I'm not a patient man." "Girl, decide?" Nerita closed her eyes and thought of all the dreams she'd harbored of finding love like her grandmother had described, of marrying for affection rather than desperation. But dreams didn't put food on the table or keep babies from crying themselves to sleep from hunger. When she opened her eyes, they blazed with a fire that made even the giant cowboy take a half-step backward. "I'll marry you," she said, her voice ringing with quiet dignity. "But understand this, Caspian Ironwood, you may buy my body, but you'll never own my soul." The wedding took place at dawn the next morning, with only the circuit preacher and Nerita's terrified family as witnesses. She wore her mother's faded blue dress, the only decent garment she owned, and wildflowers in her auburn hair that caught the early sunlight like spun copper. Ironwood had arrived in a black suit that made him look even more imposing. If such a thing were possible, he stood ramrod straight beside her as Preacher Morrison mumbled through the ceremony, his massive frame dwarfing everyone else in the small church. When the time came to slip the ring on her finger, his hands were surprisingly gentle, though they shook slightly. "You may kiss the bride," the preacher announced with obvious discomfort. Ironwood looked down at his new wife, so small. She barely reached his chest, and something unreadable crossed his features, instead of the rough claim she'd expected. He lifted her chin with one calloused finger and pressed his lips to hers with unexpected tenderness. The kiss lasted only a moment, but it left Narita more shaken than any brutality might have. "Time to go home," he said quietly. Offering her his arm, the ride to the Ironwood Ranch took 2 hours across rolling hills, dotted with cattle. Narita sat beside her husband in stony silence, watching the landscape change from scrubland to rich pastures. When the ranch house finally came into view, she couldn't suppress a gasp of surprise. It wasn't the rough cabin she'd expected, but a sprawling 2-story home built of honey-colored stone and dark timber. Wraparound porches offered shade from the brutal summer sun, and flower boxes beneath every window blazed with color. It was beautiful, the kind of home she'd only dreamed of. "Mrs. Holloway will show you to your room," Ironwood said, as he helped her down from the wagon. "Supper's at 6. Don't be late." An elderly woman, with kind eyes and iron-gray hair, emerged from the house, wiping flour-dusted hands on her apron. "Welcome, dear," she said warmly, though her gaze flickered with concern. "I'm Margaret Holloway, the housekeeper. Come, let me show you around." The interior of the house was even more impressive than the exterior. Rich rugs covered polished wood floors, and oil paintings of Western landscapes adorned the walls. A massive stone fireplace dominated the main room, and leather-bound books filled shelves from floor to ceiling. "He's not what people think, you." "No," Mrs. Holloway said quietly as they climbed the curved staircase. "Rough around the edges, certainly, but he's got a good heart buried under all that bluster." "He bought me," Narita said flatly. "Like a breeding mare, did he?" The older woman's voice held a note of curiosity. "Then why did he have me prepare the guest room for you instead of his own?" Narita stopped mid-step. "What?" Mrs. Holloway opened a door to reveal a beautifully appointed bedroom done in soft blues and creams. Lace curtains fluttered at the windows, and a thick quilt covered the four-poster bed. Fresh roses sat in a crystal vase on the dresser, said. "You'd need time to adjust," Mrs. Holloway explained. "That the marriage should be ... gradual." His words, not mine. Confusion swirled through Narita like a dust devil. This wasn't the behavior of a man who saw women as property to be used. "I don't understand. Neither do I fully. But I've worked for Caspian Ironwood for 15 years, and I've never seen him so nervous as he was this morning." The housekeeper's eyes twinkled with secret knowledge. "He burned 3 different breakfasts trying to get everything perfect for your arrival." Before Narita could respond, heavy footsteps echoed in the hallway. Ironwood appeared in the doorway, having changed from his wedding suit into work clothes that emphasized his powerful build. His eyes swept the room, taking in her surprised expression. "Everything suitable?" he asked gruffly. "Yes, thank you." Narita's voice came out smaller than she'd intended. "It's beautiful." Goody shifted uncomfortably, suddenly looking less like the confident giant who'd commanded her compliance, and more like a man uncertain of his welcome. "I'll be working with the horses this afternoon. Mrs. Holloway will help you settle in." He started to leave, then turned back abruptly. "Narita, your family will want for nothing. I've already arranged for them to move into the Whitman house. In town, it's got 4 bedrooms and a proper kitchen. Your mother won't have to take in washing anymore." With that, he was gone, leaving Narita staring after him with her world tilted off its axis. This wasn't the monster she'd prepared herself to endure. This was something far more dangerous, a man who might actually have the capacity to touch her heart. 3 weeks passed in a strange dance of avoidance and stolen glances. Narita settled into the rhythm of ranch life, helping Mrs. Holloway with cooking and mending, tending the kitchen garden, and learning to manage the household ledgers. Ironwood was unfailingly polite but distant, treating her more like a house guest than a wife. He'd been true to his word about her family. The Fairweathers now lived in comfort for the first time in years, with her father forbidden from entering any establishment that offered gambling. Her mother sent grateful letters describing baby Ophelia's rosy cheeks and the twins. Excitement about attending the new school, but the bargain that had brought Narita here remained unspoken between them. Weight that grew heavier with each passing day. She found herself watching him when she thought he wasn't looking. The way he gentled wild horses with patience and soft words. How he carried injured calves to safety with the same careful touch he'd used to slip the wedding ring on her finger. The tired lines around his eyes when he came in from long days. On the range, "It's been alone too long," Mrs. Holloway confided one evening as they prepared supper. His parents died when he was barely 20, left him to run this whole operation by himself. Never had time for courting or social niceties. Then why marry at all? Hada, Narita asked, cutting vegetables with perhaps more force than necessary. Could have hired any number of women too, to fulfill his needs. Could he? The older woman gave her a knowing look. Tell me, dear, have you seen him with any of the saloon girls when we go to town? Have you heard stories about him keeping company with loose women? Now that she thought about it, Narita realized she hadn't. The ranch hands spoke of their boss with respect tinged with fear, but never with the crude jokes men usually made about each other's romantic conquests. He wants sons, she said weakly. Yes, but legitimate ones. Heirs who can hold their heads high in society, who won't be whispered about or turned away from decent homes. Mrs. Holloway's voice gentled. He may have gone about it all wrong, but his intentions aren't entirely selfish. That evening, Narita made a decision that surprised even her. Instead of retiring to her room after supper, as had become her habit, she followed Ironwood onto the front porch, where he sat smoking his evening pipe and watching the sunset paint the mountains crimson. May I join you? She asked. He looked up, in surprise, then quickly stood and gestured to the chair beside his. Of course, it's your home now too. They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, listening to the night sounds of the ranch cattle lowing in the distance, the soft whicker of horses in the corrals, the gentle creak of the porch boards settling in the cooling air. Tell me about your parents, Narita said suddenly. Ironwood's pipe paused halfway to his lips. Why? Because if I'm to bear your children, they should know something about their grandparents. He was quiet for so long that she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, in a voice softer than she'd ever heard from him, my mother was tiny, like you. Could barely reach my father's shoulder, but she ruled this house and half the territory through sheer force of will. Had a laugh that could charm birds from the trees. And your father? Built this ranch from nothing but determination and stubbornness. Taught me that a man's word is his bond, that you protect what's yours no matter the cost. His gray eyes found hers in the growing darkness. They loved each other something fierce, used to scandalize the church ladies with their public displays of affection. Is that what you want? Narita asked softly. That kind of love? Ironwood's laugh was harsh. Want it? Yes. Expect it. That's another matter entirely. He turned to face her fully. I know what I did to you, Narita. I know you didn't choose this marriage freely, but I promise you I'll do everything in my power to make you content here. Content, she repeated, tasting the word like bitter medicine. Not happy? I wouldn't dare hope for happiness, he admitted. But perhaps we could find respect, companionship, a partnership that benefits us both. Das. The honesty in his voice nearly broke her heart. Here was a man who'd built an empire, with his bare hands but believed himself unworthy of love, a giant who commanded respect through fear because he'd never learned how to ask for affection. Caspian, she said, using his given name for the first time since their wedding. What if I told you that happiness wasn't impossible, that respect and companionship could grow into something more? He went very still. What are you saying? I'm saying that maybe we should stop dancing around each other like strangers. We're married, for better or worse. Hey, perhaps it's time we tried to make it better. The change between them didn't happen overnight, but it began with small gestures. Narita started bringing Ironwood coffee while he worked in his study, lingering to discuss the ranch's business with an intelligence that surprised him. He began joining her in the kitchen garden each morning, his massive hands surprisingly gentle as he helped her tend the vegetables. Their conversations grew longer, deeper. She learned about his dreams of breeding the finest horses in the territory, his plans to build a school for the children of his ranch hands, his quiet charitable work that he'd sworn Mrs. Holloway to secrecy about. He discovered her love of books, her quick mind for numbers, her fierce protectiveness of those she cared about, You could have been anything, he said one evening, as they walked along the creek that bordered his property. A teacher, a shopkeeper's wife, in some civilized town. You shouldn't be stuck out here with a rough man like me and miss all this. Narita gestured to the vast sky blazing with stars, the rolling hills silver in the moonlight. Miss Learning. To break wild horses and balance ledgers and make bread that doesn't taste like sawdust? You've been happy here? The vulnerability in his voice made her chest tight. Happier than I expected, she admitted. You're not the monster I thought you were, Caspian Ironwood. He stopped walking and turned to face her. In the moonlight, his harsh features looked almost tender. What am I then? The question hung between them like a challenge. Narita knew her answer would change everything, would either deepen the fragile bond growing between them or shatter it entirely. You're a man who's forgotten how to be gentle with himself, she said softly. A man who gives more than he takes, but never asks for anything in return. She took a breath, gathering courage. You're someone I could learn to love if you'd let me. His sharp intake of breath was audible in the still night air. Narita, I know why you married. Me, she interrupted. I know what you expect from this union, but what if we could have more? What if instead of just giving you sons, I could give you the kind of partnership your parents had? For a moment, hope blazed so brightly in his eyes that it took her breath away. Then, as if he'd caught himself in dangerous thinking, his expression shuddered. You don't know what you're saying? You think you owe me something because I helped your family? But this has nothing to do with gratitude. The force of her words surprised them both. If you think I'm so weak-willed that I'd offer my heart out of obligation, then why? The voice was raw with need and disbelief. 'Cause you left roses by my place at breakfast every morning for 3 weeks? 'Cause you spent 2 hours fixing my mother's rocking chair without being asked? Because you read to Mrs. Holloway when her eyes are too tired for her evening stories? Narita stepped closer, close enough to see the pulse hammering in his throat. Because underneath all that gruff armor, you're the kindest man I've ever known. He reached for her, then stopped, his hands hanging uncertain in the air between them. Touch me, she whispered. Please. Because you bought the right, but because you want to. His hands settled on her shoulders with reverent care, as if she were made of spun glass. I've wanted to since the day I first saw you. Even when you looked at me like I was the devil himself, I wanted to hold you, protect you, make you smile. Then do it. He pulled her into his arms with a groan that sounded like a prayer answered. This kiss was nothing like their chaste wedding. Peckett was desperate and hungry and full of weeks of suppressed longing. Narita melted against his massive frame, her hands fisting in his shirt as she kissed him back with equal fervor. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Come to me tonight, she said against his lips. Come to me as my husband, not my owner. Are you certain? His voice shook with restraint. Once we cross this line, I've never been more certain of anything in my life. That night, Caspian? Ironwood came to his wife's room not as a conqueror, but as a man humbled by the gift of love he'd never expected to receive. And Narita welcomed him not out of duty or gratitude, but with a heart that had chosen him freely at last. The first time, Narita missed her monthly courses. She told herself it was the stress of adjusting to married life. The second time, she could no longer deny the truth. On a crisp October morning, she stood before the mirror in her bedroom and saw the subtle changes, the slight roundness to her belly, the new fullness in her breasts, the glow that Mrs. Holloway had been commenting on for weeks. She was carrying Caspian's child. The knowledge should have filled her with joy. Instead, she found herself gripped by an unexpected fear. What if this changed things between them? What if he saw her pregnancy as the fulfillment of his bargain rather than the natural result of their growing love? You're quieter than usual this morning, Caspian observed, as they shared breakfast on the sun-drenched porch. 3 months of true marriage had changed him, the harsh lines around his eyes had softened, and he smiled more readily. Everything. All right. I need to tell you something, she said, setting down her coffee cup with trembling hands. His attention sharpened immediately. What is it? Before she could lose her nerve, she blurted, I'm going to have a baby. The silence stretched between them like a held breath. Caspian's face went through a series of expressions: shock, disbelief, and finally, a wonder so profound it brought tears to her eyes. "A baby?" he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. "Due in late spring, I think." He was on his feet in an instant, crossing to kneel beside her chair. His large hands settled gently on her still flat stomach, and the reverence in his touch made her heart ache. "Our baby," he said, looking up at her with eyes bright with unshed tears. "Our child, are you pleased?" she asked, though his expression made the answer obvious. "Pleased?" He laughed, the sound rich with joy. "Narita, I've dreamed of this moment for months. To know that our love has created new life." He pressed his forehead against her belly. "I'm overwhelmed." The word love hung between them, acknowledged but never spoken aloud. They'd grown closer over the past months, their physical intimacy deepening into emotional connection. But neither had dared voice the feelings that had bloomed between them. "Caspian," she began, gathering courage. "What we have now, this marriage, not what either of us expected when we stood before Preacher Morrison, is it?" He raised his head to meet her eyes. "No, it's better. So much better than I ever dared hope. I need you to know something." She cupped his face in her hands, memorizing every beloved line and scar. "When this baby is born, it won't be because you commanded me to give you sons. It will be because two people who found each other against all odds created something beautiful together. Nerd." Quotes. His voice broke on her name. "I love you," she said simply. "I love your gentleness with wounded animals, your fierce protection of everyone under your care, the way you hold me at night like I'm precious beyond measure. Love the man you are beneath all that intimidating bluster." Tears spilled down his cheeks, this giant of a man who'd never learned it was safe to show vulnerability. "I love you too," he whispered. "More than the ranch, more than my own life. You've brought light to places in my soul I'd forgotten existed." They held each other on that sun-warmed porch, their hearts finally speaking the truth they'd both been afraid to acknowledge. The baby growing within her was proof of that, love not the product of a cold bargain, but the natural flowering of two hearts that had chosen each other freely. Over the following weeks, Caspian transformed into the most devoted husband imaginable. He insisted she rest more, hired additional help for Mrs. Holloway, and began work on a nursery that would rival any palace. But most importantly, he talked to her belly every night, sharing his dreams for their child in a voice soft with wonder. "Or a girl doesn't matter," he murmured against her skin one evening. "I just want them healthy and happy. Want them to know they're loved beyond measure." "What about those 3 strong sons you demanded?" Rita teased, running her fingers through his silver-streaked hair. He looked up at her with such tenderness. It stole her breath. "I was a fool who didn't know the difference between getting what you want and getting what you need. What I need is you, and this baby, and whatever other children God sees fit to bless us with. And if this one's a girl, then she'll be as beautiful and strong-willed as her mother. I'll spend my life protecting her from men like I used to be." Narita laughed, pulling him up to kiss her properly. "I think you've changed considerably from the man who threw silver dollars on my family's table." "You changed me," he said against her lips. "Taught me that love freely given is worth more than anything that can be bought or demanded." Spring arrived early that year, painting the hillsides with wildflowers and bringing with it the anticipation of new life. Narita's pregnancy had progressed smoothly, her belly now round and prominent beneath her loosened dresses. Caspian had become impossibly protective, hovering over her with anxious care that both exasperated and touched her. "Not made of china," she protested one morning when he insisted on helping her down the porch steps. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. Not my woman carrying my child," he replied firmly. "I'll be damned if I take any chances with either of you." Their love had deepened with each passing month, built on a foundation of mutual respect and genuine affection. The ranch prospered under their joint management, Narita's sharp mind for business complementing Caspian's practical knowledge of ranching. They'd become true partners in every sense of the word. The baby chose to make its appearance on a warm May morning, the apple trees in full bloom, and the air sweet with the promise of summer. Dr. Whitmore had arrived the night before.
All summoned?
By Caspian's near-frantic telegraph, and Mrs. Holloway had prepared everything with military precision. "This is normal," the doctor assured Caspian as Nerita's labor progressed. "First babies often take their time." Caspian paced the downstairs parlor like a caged wolf, running his hands through his hair until it stood in wild peaks. Every sound, from upstairs, sent him toward the staircase, only to be turned back by Mrs. Holloway's stern orders. "She needs you calm and confident," the housekeeper said firmly. "Not wild with worry." "What if something goes wrong?" he asked, his voice raw with fear. "What if I lose her?" "That girl is stronger than she looks. She'll be fine, and so will the baby." Hours passed in a haze of anxiety and prayer. Then, as the sun reached its peak, a new sound echoed through the house, the lusty cry of a newborn infant. Dr. Whitmore appeared at the top of the stairs, his sleeves rolled up and a smile creasing his weathered face. "Congratulations, Ironwood. You have a daughter." Caspian's knees nearly buckled with relief. "Nerita, tired but healthy. She wants to see you." He took the stairs 3 at a time, his heart hammering against his ribs. He paused at the bedroom door, suddenly nervous about meeting his child, then pushed inside. Nerita lay propped against the pillows, exhausted but radiant. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in soft yellow blankets, their daughter red-faced. And perfect, with a cap of dark hair and eyes that would someday match her mother's warm brown. "Hello, Papa," Nerita said softly, smiling through her tears. Caspian approached the bed with reverent steps, his eyes locked on the miracle in his wife's arms. "She's beautiful," he whispered. "Perfect. Would you like to hold her?" With infinite care he accepted the baby from Nerita's arms. His massive hands looked absurdly large against her tiny form, but his touch was gentle as a whisper. The infant opened her eyes and seemed to study his face with grave seriousness. "Hello, little one," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm your father, and I love you more than all the stars in the sky. What shall we call her?" Nerita asked. They'd discussed names for months, but looking at their daughter now, only one seemed to fit. "Esperanza," Caspian said. "Hope, because that's what she is, the hope I never dared believe in." "Speranza Ironwood," Nerita repeated, testing the sound. "I like it." As if in approval, the baby made a small sound and curled her tiny fingers around her father's thumb. Caspian looked from his daughter to his wife, overwhelmed by the magnitude of his blessings. I used to think strength came from taking what you wanted," he said quietly. "But real strength comes from protecting what you love." "And what do you love, Caspian Ironwood?" Nerita asked, though she already knew the answer. He settled carefully on the edge of the bed, cradling their daughter while his free arm encircled his wife. "I love my family, a beautiful, brave wife who saw past my rough exterior to the man I could become. My perfect daughter who will grow up knowing she's cherished beyond measure." "Just one daughter," Nerita teased. "What happened to those 3 strong sons you demanded?" Caspian's laugh was soft and full of wonder. "If God blesses us with more children, I'll welcome them gladly. But this," he gestured to encompass their small family, "this is already more happiness than I ever dreamed possible." Apple blossoms drifted past the windows like snow, and the future stretched before them bright with promise. 5 years later, the Ironwood Ranch had become the most prosperous in 3 territories, but its true wealth lay in the laughter that echoed from its halls. Little Esperanza had indeed been joined by siblings, twin boys named Gabriel and Samuel, born 3 years after their sister and another daughter, Celeste, who'd arrived the previous spring. Nerita watched from the kitchen window as her husband played with their children in the garden, his massive frame folded down to their level as he helped them plant seeds in the rich earth. Esperanza, now a precocious 5-year-old, with her mother's quick wit and her father's stubborn streak, directed her younger brothers with the authority of a general commanding troops. "More careful with the carrots, Gabe," she instructed.
"Papa
"Says they need to be in straight rows." "I am being careful," Gabriel protested, his chubby hands covered in dirt. Samuel, quieter than his twin, but no less determined, methodically placed each seed exactly where his father had shown him. Baby Celeste sat in Caspian's lap, clapping her hands at the butterflies that danced among the flowers. Mrs. Holloway joined Nerita at the window, both women smiling at the domestic scene. Hard to believe that same man once stood in your families. Cabin demanding sons like he was ordering cattle, the housekeeper mused. He was desperate then, Nerita said softly. Desperate and alone, and convinced that fear was the only way to get what he needed. I'm glad I was brave enough to see past that to who he really was. Brave enough to love him. Brave enough to let myself be loved by him, Nerita corrected. That was the harder part. A knock at the front door interrupted their conversation. Nerita dried her hands on her apron and went to answer it, surprised to find a young couple standing on her porch. The man was tall and weathered from outdoor work, while the woman beside him was clearly with child. Mrs. Ironwood, the man asked, his hat in his hands. I'm sorry to bother you, but I heard. That is, people say you and your husband might be able to help folks in difficult situations. Nerita's heart went out to them immediately. She recognized the desperation in their eyes, the careful way the woman held herself. The proud set to the man's shoulders despite his obvious need. Please come in, she said warmly. I'll get my husband. Caspian appeared within minutes, drawn by his wife's call and the sight of strangers at their door. The couple straightened nervously at his approach. He was still an imposing figure, his reputation as a tough negotiator well known throughout the territory. This is Marcus and Elena Navarro, Nerita said by way of introduction. They were hoping we might be able to help them. We heard about the loan program you started, Marcus said quickly. For young couples trying to start their own ranches. We have some land, not much, but good grazing and Elena's got experience with horses. We just need enough to get started. To build a decent cabin before the baby comes, Elena stepped forward, her chin raised with quiet dignity. We can pay you back. It might take time, but we're not looking for charity. We want to earn our way. Caspian studied them with the same calculating gaze he'd once used to assess cattle and business deals. But Nerita could see the softness in his expression, the way his eyes lingered on Elena's rounded belly. How much land do you have, he asked. 160 acres along Willow Creek. Previous owner couldn't make it work. That's because he tried to grow crops instead of raising cattle. In your experience with horses? Caspian directed this question to Elena. Worked for the Fletcher Ranch before I married Marcus. I can break and train most any horse you put in front of me. Caspian was quiet for a long moment, and Nerita could practically see him thinking. Finally, he smiled, the same gentle smile he reserved for his children and the wounded animals he nursed back to health. Tell me about your plans, he said, gesturing for them to sit. I want to hear everything. 3 hours later, Marcus and Elena Navarro left the Ironwood Ranch with a promissory note for enough money to build their cabin, stock their land with cattle, and support their growing family through their first year. They also left with tears of gratitude and promises to make their benefactor proud. You're getting soft in your old age, Nerita teased, as they watched the young couple's wagon disappear down the road. Old age? Caspian raised an eyebrow.
Ow.
Show you old age, Mrs. Ironwood. He swept her into his arms despite her laughing protests, spinning her around until they were both dizzy. The children ran over from the garden, demanding to be included in the embrace, and soon all 6 members of the Ironwood family were tangled together in a heap of laughter and love. Later that evening, after the children were tucked into their beds and the house had settled into peaceful quiet, Caspian and Nerita sat on their porch swing, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Do you ever regret it? He asked suddenly. Marrying me, I mean, giving up the life you might have had. Nerita turned to study his profile in the moonlight. This man who'd become her heart, her partner, her home. Every choice leads somewhere different, she said thoughtfully. If I'd refused you that night, I might have found some other kind of happiness. But it wouldn't have been this happiness. It wouldn't have been for beautiful children who call you Papa with such adoration. It wouldn't have been watching you become the man I always suspected you could be. I was arrogant, he said, his voice heavy with old regret. Demanding sons like I was placing an order at the mercantile. I'm amazed you didn't shoot me where I stood. You were desperate, she corrected gently, and lonely. And so convinced that you had to take what you wanted because no one would ever give it freely. She reached for his hand, intertwining their fingers. But look what we built from that. desperate beginning. Look what love can do when it's given the chance to grow. He lifted their joined hands to his lips, pressing a soft kiss to her knuckles. Those 3 strong boys, I demanded. You got 2 of them? 2 daughters who'll be stronger than any son? Nerita smiled, thinking of fierce little Esperanza and baby Celeste, who already showed signs of her sister's determined spirit. Got everything I never knew I wanted, he said quietly. A partner who challenges me, children who make me want to be better than I am, a home filled with laughter instead of silence. A shooting star blazed across the sky, and Nerita made a wish not for anything new, but for the preservation of what they'd built together. For many more years of watching their children grow, of growing old beside this man who'd learned to love as fiercely as he'd once fought. The Navarro couple today, she said. They reminded me of us in those early days. So much hope mixed with fear. That's why I'm helping them. Someone took a chance on me. Once a small woman, with more courage. Then Sense, who saw past my rough exterior to the man I could become. He squeezed her hand. Maybe they'll find what we found. And what's that? That love isn't something you can demand or buy or command, something that grows in the spaces between 2 people who are brave enough to be vulnerable with each other. As if summoned by their conversation, the sound of small feet pattering across the wooden floors reached them. Esperanza appeared in the doorway, her dark hair tousled from sleep and her nightgown trailing behind her. Mama? Papa? I had a bad dream. Without hesitation, Caspian opened his arms and their eldest daughter climbed onto his lap, snuggling against his broad chest with the complete trust of a child who'd never known anything but love and safety. Was the dream about Little Star? He asked, smoothing her hair with gentle fingers. A big, scary man came and took you away. She whispered against his shirt. Caspian's eyes met Nerita's over their daughter's head, both thinking of that long-ago night when he'd been that scary man, taking what he thought he needed through force. In intimidation. No one's going to take Papa away, Nerita said firmly. He belongs here with us, forever and always. Promise? Esperanza asked, her voice small and uncertain. I promise, Caspian said, his voice rough with emotion. I'll never leave you, any of you. You're my heart, my home, my everything that matters. Satisfied, Esperanza settled more comfortably against her father's chest, her breathing evening out as she drifted back toward sleep. Caspian continued to rock gently, reluctant to disturb the precious weight of his daughter in his arms. She's getting so big, Nerita murmured. Soon she'll be too grown up for midnight cuddles. Then I'll treasure every one we have left, he replied. It's just like I treasure every moment with you, every day of this life we've built together. The moon sailed higher, casting silver light across their land, their legacy, their children's inheritance. In the distance, cattle lowed softly, and the night wind carried the scent of growing things, of home, of a future bright with promise. When Caspian finally carried their sleeping daughter back to her bed, Nerita remained on the porch, overwhelmed by the magnitude of her contentment. She thought of the frightened girl she'd been 7 years ago, facing an impossible choice in her family's ramshackle cabin. That girl could never have imagined this abundance of love, this richness of family, this deep satisfaction of a life well lived. What are you thinking about? Caspian asked when he returned, settling beside her once more. Gratitude, she said simply. For all of it, the good and the bad, the fear and the joy, the journey that brought us here. Even for that night when I threw silver dollars on your table and demanded you bear my sons, especially for that night. Because without it, I never would have discovered that the scariest-looking men sometimes have the gentlest hearts. I never would have learned that love can bloom anywhere, even in the most unlikely soil. Caspian pulled her close, marveling as he always did at how perfectly she fit against his side. How her presence could calm the restless places in his soul that had driven him for so many years. I love you, Nerita Ironwood, he said, using her married name like a prayer. It's more than I loved my first breath, more than I'll love my last. I love you, my gentle giant, she replied. My husband, my partner, the father of my children, and the keeper of my heart. They sat together in the peaceful darkness, surrounded by the life they'd created, the love they'd nurtured, and the unshakable knowledge that sometimes the most Beautiful stories begin with the most unlikely encounters. In the morning, they would wake to the chaos and joy of family life, to the demands of the ranch and the challenges of raising four spirited children. But tonight, in the quiet hours when the world belonged only to them, they held each other and marveled at the miracle of a love that had transformed a desperate bargain into a lifetime of happiness. The giant cowboy had indeed gotten his strong children, but more importantly, he'd learned that true strength lay not in taking what you wanted, but in cherishing what you were given. And in a small bedroom upstairs, four children slept peacefully, dreaming of tomorrow's adventures, secure in the knowledge that they were loved beyond measure by parents who had chosen each other not just once, but every day, since a choice that had created not just a family, but a legacy of love that would endure for generations to come.